The education components, there are two components, just so that you understand. It's the training program, which takes about an hour to complete. And then there's the summary of the law, which has to be acknowledged every year. And that's simply a document that's presented. And then you just scroll down, and at the bottom of it, you said, I received the document. And that's just some literature so that you can review it to help you better understand your legal obligations as a town employee. If you don't, and then you violate the law, and you violate it in a significant way, that's an oops moment. Understand that the Ethics Commission can enforce the law and can impose penalties of up to $10,000 for a significant violation. Now that doesn't, I don't want to scare you, that doesn't occur all that often. Most of what we do involves education, providing public employees with the information they need to understand the law. Only in limited instances where there is a violation and it's an egregious violation, not just a regular violation, the Commission is empowered to enforce the statute. If there's willful misconduct, unlawful self-dealing, somebody has enriched themselves at the public expense. So there's a conflict law violation, but underpinning that violation is some bad conduct. Somebody did something wrong and they should have known better. Then the Commission can take action. Now we get, I said we get about 6,000 calls a year into our legal division, so don't be afraid to call us, everybody else does. In most cases, it's a 5 or 10 minute phone call, just to get a quick read on whether this is an issue that involves a conflict law, and then if so, what the compliance rules are. Our enforcement division gets anywhere from 700 to 1,000 complaints in a year. All of them are vetted. We are probably one of the few government agencies left that continues to receive and accept anonymous complaints. We don't care what somebody's motives might be or what their motivation is for not identifying themselves. We're concerned about the quality of the information. Is there a conflict issue out there that needs to be addressed? Because we want to become aware of those so that we can address them. But out of the 700 to 1,000 complaints we might get in a year, the Commission only takes public action in about 12 to 24 cases. Very small percentage, as I said, only in cases where there's an egregious violation. So most of what we do, as I said, involves education. There are instances that our enforcement division will send out hundreds of confidential letters every year to public employees explaining, hey, we got this information. If we could prove the facts, it would suggest a violation. This is how not to violate. If you have any question, get advice from our legal division and go forth. Okay, obtaining advice. As I said, we have lawyers on staff to provide you, me, and everyone else with free confidential legal advice. There are just a couple of ground rules. We don't provide third-party advice because we have to keep matters confidential. We can explain how the law applies to you, but we can't tell you how it applies to someone else. They have to call us. We also don't give out past conduct. Conflicts of interest happen every day in government. They may never happen to you, but they happen every day. They're not to be feared. They're to be managed. You manage conflicts by getting out in front. And that starts by recognizing when your public responsibilities and private interests intersect, when the red flag should go up. Then the second part of it is don't assume something's not a big deal. Don't assume nobody's going to find out about it. I can point you to our section of the website with all of our enforcement cases that will suggest otherwise. Whether something is a big deal or not is never a decision you get to make about your own conduct. Somebody higher than you in the food chain is always going to get to determine whether something you did was a big deal or not. Also, we work in government. Everything requires transparency. We've got public records law requirements, open meeting law requirements, procurement law requirements. All the public's business is done in the light of day. So assuming that nobody's going to find out about something, you'd be taking your chances. We've had cases where somebody thought, well, somebody came up to me and slid me a couple of Red Sox tickets because I'm a public employee and they like me. I know I'm not supposed to accept them, but who's going to find out? And then somebody finds out, and then we find out, and then oops. And we want to avoid all of that. So conflict law disclosures. As I said, the conflict law requires transparency. Public employees are not allowed to perform their public duties with any hidden or undisclosed conflicts. Now, when I say conflict, I've also talked about outside interest, public responsibilities intersecting with outside interests or private interests or biases. A conflict of interest is essentially your biases, the people and the entities that you are predisposed to want to favor. And whenever there's that intersection, the public will become concerned. This is some component of your private life. Are they going to get preferential treatment from you because you're the public employee making decisions about whether they can do what they want to do? So the conflict law requires disclosure of a conflict in certain instances. Now, what is the process to comply with the law? Well, the disclosure has to be in writing. It is not sufficient to tell your supervisor or your manager, hey, I know this person that I'm handling, because that just disappears into the ether. The person you tell may or may not react appropriately to what you're saying. So a conflict law disclosure to comply with the law has to be in writing. We work in public, there's a written record of how the public's business is being conducted, and in any instance where a public employee has a conflict and the law allows them to continue to do their job, provided that they disclose the conflict, the disclosure has to be in writing. It becomes part of the public record. The disclosure also has to contain all relevant facts that constitute the bias. You can't shade it in a way that takes out all the bad stuff. You know, if it's relevant to your particular bias, you have to disclose it. For example, if I'm poised to consider an application where I get to say yes or no, and the person I'm deciding on, the applicant, happens to be an SOB that sued me 10 years ago, do I have a potential bias? Absolutely. Am I favorably predisposed to want to benefit them? Absolutely not. But the law works both ways, not just those that you favor, but those that you disfavor. In any situation where you have a potential bias, you stay out of the matter unless you can determine through your own conscience that you can consider the matter fairly and unbiased. If you can proceed, but you have to have that disclosure in place first. And the disclosure has to be submitted in advance. Before you take the public action where you have the bias, the disclosure has to be in place so that the public can have confidence that any potential biases have been disclosed up front. You've got to put the cards on the table. You're not complying with the law if you engage in conduct where you have a bias and then file the disclosure afterwards. It's mitigating. You know, we're not going to take public action in that instance because there was an intent to comply with the law, just not a correct process followed. So it has to be in place. As I said, when you're talking about conflicts of interest, it's about managing them by getting out in front, knowing when the red flag should go up, and then finding out, is this a conflict, and if so, can I still do my job, and if it requires me to file a disclosure, all has to be done in advance. Where do we file them? Well, it depends on what kind of public position we occupy. The statute uses the term appointing authority. That's the person who's responsible for appointment to your particular position. Like, for example, I work for the Ethics Commission. My appointing authority is the Commission's executive director. If I have to file a conflict law disclosure, it's with the executive director. The executive director's appointing authority is the 5-member commission. The appointing authority for any of the 5 commission members depends on who appointed them to the commission. So in your instance, you need to know who is your appointing authority in case you have to file a conflict law disclosure. They're public records. As I said, it becomes part of the public record about how the public's business is being conducted. The recipient has to store that public record or keep it on file for a period of 6 years in case anyone comes in and they want to know, hey, has so-and-so filed a disclosure? They knew this person. Did they disclose it up front? That disclosure would have to be produced. Now, if you're elected, you don't have an appointing authority. So elected officials file conflict law disclosures with the town clerk's office. Again, they have to be maintained for a period of 6 years. Okay, that's sort of the housekeeping stuff. We'll start talking about the conflict law by topic. Topic 1, the gift restriction rules. The question, can I accept a gift from someone? The answer, it depends. Every answer in connection with a conflict law question begins with, it depends. The bulleted items that you see on the screens here constitute the gift restriction rules. Again, confidence in government, integrity in the work that we do as public employees. Gifts are restricted under the conflict law because gift giving in the public sector can undermine confidence in government, where the public will become concerned. When a public employee receives a gift from somebody where they're also going to be poised to take actions that affect the gift giver, are they acting in the public interest, or are they instead going to be motivated by the fact that that person gave them a gift? Will they decide a matter differently than they ordinarily would because they received a gift? The conflict law is trying to hit an ever-moving target. At what point could a public employee be improperly influenced in the performance of a duty? And it appears in the gift restrictions, and then also we'll talk about in the code of conduct under improper use of public position. But that's what the law's intent is, to restrict gifts to public employees because gift giving can undermine confidence in government. The specific restrictions are the bulleted items here. Bribes are prohibited. That's when I said some of this stuff is going to be intuitive, that's the intuitive stuff. We all get that. Bribes are prohibited. Why? Because they're corrupt acts. Why? Because inherent in the bribe is something called a quid pro quo, which just means there's an exchange. I give you this, and for this, you give me that. Instead of performing your duties the way you're supposed to, you instead make decisions specific to what the person offering the bribe wants. Quid pro quo. Example. So I'm traveling to a meeting out in Western Mass, and I'm running awfully late. I'm on the Pike, and the speed limit on the Pike is 65, and I see a little opening, and so I give the car a little go-go juice, and before you know it, I'm doing 90, and I didn't see the trooper, but the trooper sure saw me. And so I get pulled over. I'm asked to produce my license and registration, and when I produce it, I tuck a $100 bill into the mix. I don't have to say anything, but everybody there knows what that $100 bill means. Quid pro quo. In other words, the trooper, in 10 out of 10 instances where they catch somebody going 90 in a 65, would write a citation. The intent of that $100 bill is to change that, so that for this 11th instance, the citation doesn't get written. It's corrupting because the trooper is being asked to not perform their public duties, to not act in the public interest in this instance, and they're motivated by some item of value, the $100 bill. That's a bribe. A bribe is to induce a specific result. It's illegal because we're supposed to follow rules that guide how we handle matters. And in a bribe situation, those rules go out the window. We instead make decisions to affect what the person offering the bribe wants. Both parties can violate the conflict law in this kind of an instance, and they would be subject to civil penalties of up to $25,000 if the issue is handled by the Ethics Commission. Now, bribes are essentially criminal acts. So the Ethics Commission enforces the law civilly, and the Commission can impose civil penalties of up to $25,000 for violation of the bribery section. It's the most serious violation under the law because it involves actual corruption. The other sections don't. But there are criminal penalties that attach to this section and a couple of the other sections. And we can't enforce the law criminally, but the AG can, and the DA can. And so in instances where we've got these kinds of complaints that come in, it's once in a blue moon. This is a section of law we deal with the least, because everybody understands their obligations, but sometimes somebody goes off the rails and they can't help themselves, and then we got to clean it up. But if it's the Ethics Commission, it's under a civil enforcement context, potential penalty $25,000. If it's the AG or DA knocking on the door, it's a potential penalty of 10 years in jail and a fine of up to $100,000. So, and we regularly coordinate. Although we have to keep matters confidential, the statute allows us to talk to agencies that can criminally enforce the statute so that we can coordinate, because we don't want to be investigating something that some other agency is investigating in the same. And we evaluate, hey, is this something more appropriate for the Ethics Commission, or is this something that should be handled as a criminal investigation? The middle bullet point deals with, if any of you are familiar with the $50 rule, it falls under the section we call illegal gifts and gratuities. And this section says that it's a violation for anyone to offer or give to a public employee, or for a public employee to solicit or receive any item that is of substantial value. And that term means any item that's worth $50 or more. Any item worth $50 or more that is given, the statutory language says, for or because of some official act performed or to be performed. The translation is any item worth $50 or more given to a public employee by someone with whom the public employee has official dealings. We cannot accept gifts worth $50 or more given to us by those with whom we have dealings, where there's a business nexus between us and the gift giver. Why $50? That's a threshold limit. As I said, the conflict law is attempting to hit an ever-moving target. At what point, at what value of a gift could a public employee be improperly influenced? We don't know. If you've been in government for a while and you're making a decent salary, maybe something worth $50 isn't going to move the needle at all. But if you're fairly new to government and you're not necessarily making a great salary, maybe a gift worth $50 or more would cause you to think differently about the gift giver, could cause you to decide matters differently than you ordinarily would. And so that $50 is there as a threshold, just like OUI, 0.08. If you blow on the breathalyzer and you get 0.8 or higher, there is a presumption under law that you're impaired. Not conclusive. You can still defend yourself and maybe you're not impaired, but you have to prove that. But there's that presumption. Less than 0.08, there is no presumption. Same thing under the conflict law. $50 or more, there is a presumption that you could be improperly influenced. Less than $50, no such presumption. So that's the $50 rule. The bottom bullet point is sort of the threshold gift restriction rule. It takes out the business nexus. It just ties the gift worth $50 or more to who you are as a public employee. If somebody gives you a gift worth $50 or more and they're giving it to you because you're a town employee, it is prohibited. Again, confidence in government, pay-to-play concerns. You cannot accept a gift worth $50 or more, even if you have no dealings with the gift giver, if your public position is what motivates the gift. Questions on the gift restriction rules? It gets kind of subtle because we'll get calls, hey, we got a holiday gift basket. Hey, the contractor or vendor sent this thing over. Hey, I got a floral bouquet from the vendor I'm overseeing. All these items that are worth $50 or more. So you think about it in your life as a town employee about, issues that might come up. You go to lunch down at the town spa and you're good friends with the owner, but they only know you because you're a town employee, and so your bill gets comped, something like that. You're a police officer, you go into the local Dunkin' Donuts and they won't take your money no matter how much you beg them to. Those kinds of issues. Where the public views those, the public can become concerned about whether somebody would get preferential treatment. Say somebody violates the law, but they've always done favors for the town employees that are going to be acting on those matters. What will the public think about it? Question? Sure. Yeah, that's called improper use of public position. If they would normally write a ticket, but they don't because I gave them $100, or they don't because you badged them, that's still a problem. In any situation where they would normally write a ticket, but because of the circumstances they don't, that would be using one's public position to secure a benefit that they're not entitled to. Both parties there would violate the law. If the trooper succumbed to that and didn't write a ticket where they ordinarily would, didn't make an arrest where they ordinarily would because somebody badged, or didn't write a ticket or didn't make an arrest because the $100 came across. Any of those instances would violate the conflict of interest law. Question?
The state of Massachusetts, significantly similar to other states?
No. We are probably unique, and we are the model for what states should be doing. We are modeled after the federal statute, the Federal Ethics Commission, the federal conflict of interest law. Our law was put in place in 1963 in response to a certain president who appointed his brother to the attorney general position. That's nepotism. But in any event, there was a federal statute, and we modeled ours after the federal statute. We are the model because we can enforce, we can give advice, and we can do it all. Our commission is set up like a military tribunal where we can review, accept complaints, we can prosecute significant violations, and the penalties are significant.
Follow-up question, since we're modeled after the federal statute, how can one of our Supreme Court justices set up something that gives the
Sure, sure.
continue to
So the question is, how can a Supreme Court justice accept gifts? The rules apply differently. I can tell you what would happen in Massachusetts. I can't explain or defend the federal statutes that apply to Supreme Court justices. Yeah. Well, not in all areas. Our statute's been amended. So when it was enacted in 1963, it followed the federal model, but we've implemented some changes to make it more useful, again, to maintain confidence in government. Okay. So that's the gift restriction rules. Any questions? Yes?
Do I understand correctly that you could accept one $50 gift a year?
No, but you're getting on to what the next slide is going to be. Can you accept a gift? So the $50 threshold is where there's a presumption that the public employee could be improperly influenced, and therefore it's prohibited. What about gifts that are worth less than $50? Well, there is no presumption, so public employees can accept gifts worth less than $50, but there may be a compliance rule that comes into play with that. So the example I use is that of a school teacher. Say I'm a school teacher, and the parents of one of my students have given me a $40 gift certificate to my favorite restaurant. Since it's not worth $50 or more, it is not prohibited under the law. I can accept it. But where the law is always looking for areas where public employees could be improperly influenced, or the public could have a concern about whether a public employee is acting in the public interest, even with gifts worth less than $50, those circumstances could create an appearance of a conflict of interest. And as I indicated earlier, whenever there are circumstances that could create an appearance of a conflict of interest, a disclosure is required. Transparency is required. So in the case of a school teacher accepting a $40 gift certificate to their favorite restaurant, it can be accepted. But if the acceptance of the gift creates an appearance of a conflict of interest, then while it can be accepted, a disclosure would be required with the teacher's appointing authority, which would be the school principal. Now, it gets kind of nuanced, because do all circumstances create an appearance of a conflict? Not necessarily. Example, say I get that $40 gift certificate at the end of the school year. As a teacher, I have my official dealings with folks, parents, students, colleagues, public, what have you. If I were to get that gift certificate at the end of the school year, such that I wouldn't be having any official dealings, any further official dealings with the parents because it's at the end of the school year, that circumstance does not create an appearance of a conflict of interest. The appearance problem is not created when I accept the gift certificate. It's created at the point where, after receiving the gift certificate, I'm then going to have official dealings with the gift giver. So end of the school year, I can accept it. I don't have to tell the boss. Middle of the school year, where I am going to have official or continuing dealings with the parents after they give me the gift certificate, that does create an appearance problem. Other parents looking at the circumstance may become concerned. Say the parents have asked me to write a letter of recommendation. They're trying to get their child into a competitive AP class. And many other parents have made similar requests. I can't write that many letters. And then all of a sudden I get this gift certificate from these parents. what are the other parents going to conclude? You know, is my request now going to the bottom of the pile because these people ponied up a gift certificate and now they're going to go to the top of the pile and get a favorable recommendation from the teacher? Things like that. Circumstances that give rise to a conflict, because in government, we dispense governmental services. And we basically tell people yes and tell people no. Guess who's calling the Ethics Commission? Not the people we tell yes to, they love us. It's the people we say no to. Sometimes they're motivated to conclude, with evidence or without evidence, that the situation is rigged, that somebody's getting preferential treatment for whatever reason. Question?
Oh, I was just going to ask, so with the teacher example, say, right, what if it's a team of teachers? So say my son has 3 teachers that oversee him, and I want to give a gift, and it's $50 or more, but there's 3 of them.
Right.
But it's a shared gift,
That's right.
right? Like, how does that work?
There are circumstances where common sense says, hey,
Right.
you can't apply the rules in all situations. And so fortunately, the commission has regulations that create what we call safe harbors. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So I've explained the rules. One other rule point I want to make is aggregation. Say you're overseeing a vendor and you can't carve out a meeting during the day. You can only figure out a time at lunch or dinner. So you meet with the vendor and it's at lunch. And you get your lunch. And they then pick up the tab and the tab's $20. Can you allow the vendor to pay your tab where it's $20? Yeah, it's not worth $50. Is that a good idea? No, it's not a good idea. But under the law, it's not prohibited. You can accept it. Would the circumstance create an appearance problem that would require you to tell the boss in writing that they paid for your lunch? Most definitely. But it's not a violation of the law. Say 2 months later, same circumstance. You can only meet during lunch, you go to lunch, they pay your tab and it's $20. The commission can aggregate multiple instances from a single source. And if it's under $50 in the aggregate, you're okay. If it hits 50 or more, you're not okay. So 2 instances where the vendor's paying my $20 lunch, okay. If there's a third instance, not okay. Now, how far do you have to look back? You don't have to look back indefinitely, only a year, 365 days. So in any instance where a public employee accepts a gift worth less than $50 from someone, and it's not the first time they accepted a gift from that person, they've got to look back and find out, when was the last instance, what was the total of the last instance, total of the values, and as long as you're under $50, you're fine. You'll have to plan on writing a conflict law disclosure to your appointing authority that they did so. And part of the point of the conflict law disclosure is just not the transparency that's created. It's where you file the disclosure. You file it with the agency. So in an effort to maintain confidence in government, it says public employee with the conflict has to be transparent. You have to file the disclosure. But by filing it with the agency via the appointing authority, it then allows the appointing authority to be aware of the situation and to take whatever action they think is appropriate. In other words, I come back with a conflict law disclosure that says I went to lunch with the vendor, they paid my $20. If my boss then says, oh, no, you don't, never do that again, that's what would control the situation. The law has its restrictions, but when the appointing authority is then put on notice, they can then affect whatever outcome that they want or whatever change that they want in behavior that's in the best interest of the town or of the agency. The appointing authority has to be able to do it. The appointing authority cannot make decisions in the best interest of the town as to matters the appointing authority is not aware of. And that's why the conflict law requires transparency by the employee so that the town, via the agency or the appointing authority, is then on notice of the situation and then is poised to act if they think it's important. Okay, gifts that are prohibited. This slide has the most common issues we deal with at the Ethics Commission, and if you think about the workings of government, it's pretty much common sense. Meals, event tickets, travel expense reimbursements, gift certificates, floral arrangements, and fruit baskets. Lottery tickets, gifts offered through sales promotions. So, quick quiz. Somebody comes up to you in town hall and you only know them from their dealings in town hall. They only know you as a town employee. It's the holiday season. They come up to you and they say, season's greetings, here's a $50 scratch ticket. Can you accept it? No. Cost the giver $50 or more. What happens if you succumb to the temptation, you accept the ticket, you scratch it, and it comes up goose eggs? Still a violation. It costs the giver $50 or more. But what, however, if the person comes up to you and hands you a $2 scratch ticket? Can you accept it? Yeah, it's not $50 or more. What happens if you scratch the ticket and you win $10,000? It's your lucky day. It only costs the giver $2. You got to buy lunch and you got to tell the boss. You may have to tell the boss in writing. But that's sort of how it gets kind of nuanced. What did it cost the giver? The people, gift giving is customary in our society for events of personal significance, cultural events, and what have you. But sometimes people that have business dealings with government may want to use gift giving as a way to leverage relationships. Because when they're before government with applications or to sell product, what do they want from you? They want a lot of this. They don't like this. And gift giving is a way to leverage relationships with public employees so that when you see them coming through the door, you get the warm fuzzies. Whereas in ordinary circumstance, you would use your critical eye and evaluate what they want and what you're prepared to do. Gift giving can undermine confidence in government. So there's an advisory next to event tickets. In 2004, for those of us that can remember back that far, and it's becoming harder and harder for me, what happened in 2004 regarding our sports teams? They started winning. What were they doing before then? Not winning. So we were getting an uptick at the commission from public employees saying, hey, I was just offered tickets. Can I go? And so the commission issued an advisory. An advisory is generalized legal advice, explaining the gift restriction rules that they should already know about. But it was before the mandatory education stuff, so they used the opportunity to explain it. You can't accept anything worth $50 or more given to you by the same folks that you deal with as a public employee. The question came up because of how to establish the value of the gift. So, for example, if a vendor that I'm overseeing comes up and they hand me a ticket to a Bruins playoff game and the face value of the ticket is $45, I can accept it, right? Heck no. Because the commission will not use face value if actual value is higher. And when you're talking about tickets to coveted events like the playoffs, World Series, what have you, what's the value of that $45 ticket? It's a lot more. And so the commission used that advisory as an opportunity to explain how it establishes the value of the gift. And there are many different ways, depending. If it's a ticketed event, the ticket price might be whatever it is, but, we can also look at like a function. What was the total cost? How many people attended, divide it, and then you got the per person value. That's how you establish the value of the gift. In terms of event tickets to theater or sports, you just go on the secondary market, find out what it would cost to buy the same ticket on the secondary market. That's the value of the gift. Now, it could go the other way too. I might get a $45 ticket to the Patriots game at the last game of the season, and could I sell it for $45? Heck no. So the value of the gift would be, I might get a Patriots ticket that is $100. Can I go? Well, it depends. What's the value of the gift? And after this season, it might be less than $50, and so it wouldn't violate. So that's how we establish actual value. Question?
How would that actual value apply to the scratching thing?
Actual value does apply. It applies to the cost, not the winnings.
Right, the uptick is similar to the game ticket, right? When it upticks like that in the secondary market, or if it upticks and you get $5,000, now that's a windfall.
Yeah, but
why one and not the other?
Yeah, because we're talking about dealings with people, and they're paying for something to give to you. What did it cost them? Not what happens afterwards. You accept it, and then things might escalate. You might win free ticket, whatever. that might happen. It's what did it cost them to provide you with that initial ticket? Gifts offered through sales promotions. I had a case early on in my career where I was an investigator in the Commission's Enforcement Division. We had a food services director whose job it was to manage a finite budget to provide food for the cafeterias. She was dealing with the food wholesalers. What do wholesalers want to do? Move product. What do they do to move product? Provide inducements. And I'm dating myself now. The inducements back then were iPods and mini iPods. I know you normally order this. If you order this and you do it 3 times, you're going to qualify for the iPods. And she was tempted, and she succumbed to the temptation because she thought they'd make great gifts for the grandchildren. First of all, who owns those iPods if they qualify? Not her, the school district. Maybe the library could have made good use of those items, but instead she accepted them for her own personal use, gave them to the grandkids, and over-ordered on the budget in order to qualify for those inducements. I don't think she appreciated just how serious of a violation of the conflict law that was. Confidence in government is undermined, where the commission investigated, took enforcement action, and then what happened when she went back to work? She lost a job to boot. And so you've got to think about these issues that come up. Oh, nobody's going to find out. Oh, this isn't a big deal. Yes, it can be. Okay, let's talk about the exemptions. These bulleted items are regulatory exemptions, where the rule is, the gift restriction rule, you cannot accept a gift worth $50 or more that is given to you because of your public position or by someone with whom you have official dealings. So that's the rule we want to focus on. The Commission looked at real-life situations that don't really create a lot of conflict law mischief and said, okay, we have these regulations, and as long as we can remove the conflict law mischief, we're going to allow public employees to accept items worth more than $50 in certain circumstances. And so it created regulatory exemptions, safe harbors, if you will. The travel expense one, that's the most common one. You have an opportunity to attend a training session, but the town can't afford it in the budget. But the vendor that you deal with says, we'll pick up the cost. It's that important. Under the old rules, you couldn't accept it. But under the regulation, you can. Third-party interests, such as vendors, can pay the expenses of public employees if the intent, the destination, the issue itself, serves a legitimate public purpose. Travel expenses to events that serve a legitimate public purpose. It's legitimate public business. It's not whining and dining. How does the regulation work? Public employee has to file a disclosure with their appointing authority. I have the opportunity to go to this training, and the vendor says they'll pick up the cost. The appointing authority, upon receiving that disclosure, has to make a written determination on it, basically that says, yes, the employee's attendance at this event serves a legitimate public purpose. Who gets to decide what serves a legitimate public purpose? The town. We're not going to substitute our judgment. We're a bunch of bureaucrats working on Beacon Hill. What do we know about the town's mission? What is and what is not a legitimate public purpose? The town gets to decide that. The appointing authority gets to decide that. And if they decide it, it requires a written disclosure, a written determination by the appointing authority, and that disclosure with the determination is a public record. People are free to look at it and question the judgment of the public employees involved in that. But the regulation is available to allow public agencies to allow for additional training and education and conduct of the public's business where events might incur travel expenses. It allows public entities to pay those expenses because the Commission determined that the public benefits by allowing it. Does the public benefit if you have the opportunity to receive as much training as possible to help you do your job better? Absolutely. Does the public benefit if the town doesn't have to spend its own finite dollars to provide that training for you? Absolutely. And so the regulation is in place. It takes out the conflict law mischief by requiring transparency and a determination by the agency that this is legitimate business. And then that's a public record. unsolicited perishable items. It's not unusual for public employees who might be overseeing projects, like IT projects, that may take a period of time, and out of the blue, the vendor might send over a floral bouquet or an edible fruit basket. Do those items cost $50 or more? Yeah, that's a presumption now because the delivery cost gets you up there pretty good. It's not unusual for that to happen. But if those items cost $50 or more, doesn't that sort of drag the public employee into a conflict law violation? It could, but there's a regulation that says as to unsolicited perishable items, floral bouquets, food items, what have you, it will not violate the conflict law even if those items cost $50 or more, as long as the public employee accepts the item on behalf of their agency, not for themselves. You accept it on behalf of the town and you then share the item with everyone. And then it doesn't violate the law. So the vendor sends you a floral bouquet, perishable. It's impractical to refuse or return because it's perishable. It's going to cost $50 or more. You can accept it on behalf of the town. You don't get to take it home and it doesn't go in your office. It goes out in the lobby, goes out in town hall, some publicly accessible area for everyone to enjoy. The conflict law is concerned about gifts given to you for your personal use, where one of the intents, intended or unintended, could be to improperly leverage the relationship with you. So the vendor you're overseeing sends an edible fruit basket. Costs $50 or more? Yeah. You get it, you accept it on behalf of the town, you take it to your office, grab the chocolate-covered strawberries out of there, and leave the apple slices for everyone else. As long as you accept it on behalf of the town and you then share the items, it will not violate the conflict law. Reference here to an advisory. In 2019, the Commission updated an advisory it had originally issued in either 1984 or 1986, which basically talks about the gift restriction rules. Again, I've explained the rules. They seem fairly clear-cut, but a lot of times the issues get subtle. And that's why when situations come up, red flags should go up, call the Commission, and we can walk you through something so that you don't inadvertently violate the conflict law. Okay, other regulations, class gifts to teachers. We had the conversation about, I've got 3 teachers I need to take care of during the holidays. The Commission promulgated a regulation that says even though the rest of us have this $50 rule, we can accept gifts of up to $49.99. Teachers can accept gifts, class gifts, of up to $150. Why? Because they're better than we are. No, I'm just kidding. It's just a recognition, especially at the elementary school level. Parents want to pool resources to provide meaningful gifts for the teachers. And so we recognize that. And so how do we get the conflict law mischief out of that process? And so the Commission promulgated a reg that says teachers will be allowed to accept class gifts of up to $150, provided that the individual contributors to the gift remain unidentified. Why? So that the teacher is not put in a position where they could be improperly influenced. They don't know who gave. The regulation also says that if a teacher accepts a class gift of up to $150 and then separately a parent wants to provide a gift of up to $49.99, the teacher is duty-bound to ask that parent, did you also contribute to the class gift? Because you cannot do both. The regulation further provides for situations where teachers who frequently go out of pocket for classroom equipment and supplies to accept gift cards of up to any amount, as long as the express purpose of the gift card is to reimburse actual classroom equipment and supplies. I could provide a $300 Staples gift card to my child's teacher, and they could accept it without violating the conflict law. We tell the teachers, if you accept such a gift card, save your receipts. We reserve our right to verify that nothing went to you personally, and instead all went to the classroom. It further gets a little dicey. We tell companies that want to provide gift cards, hey, provide them to the town or the school department, and then they can dispense them according to your wishes. That makes it cleaner. Because if the public employees accept it, you can get into all sorts of situations where they might have to file a disclosure.
What if somebody like donates $1 million to high school?
Say again.
What if somebody donates $1 million to high school?
Fine. The conflict law applies to employees, not entities. The school department can accept a gift from anyone for any amount without implicating the conflict law. And that's how people get around certain stuff. Is I can't accept it, like the perishable, the unsolicited perishable items regulation. I can't accept that edible fruit basket for my own behalf, but I can accept it on behalf of the town. You can accept it if you give it to the town, and then we'll just share it with everyone else. Same thing with gift cards. We tell them, give them to the town. The town is not restricted from accepting those gift cards. They can then dispense them in accordance with your wishes. So the answer to your question is the law applies to individual public employees, not to public agencies. So gifts amongst public employees. You can give a gift of over $50 to anyone you want to accept. A subordinate cannot give a gift of anything more than nominal value to a manager. Gifts from subordinates to managers are viewed by the commission as inherently coercive. But otherwise, you can give a gift of any amount to a colleague as long as there's no managerial relationship involved. A manager can give a gift of any amount to a subordinate. There's no coerciveness inherent in that kind of a situation. Okay, that's the gift restriction rules. Question? The boss can give you whatever you want. But if you're the boss, you're limited as to what you can accept from those that you supervise. You can tell the boss that too, said I said so. Say the Ethics Commission said it's okay for you to lavish gifts upon me. See what they say.
How much can the boss get if they all collect the money, right? How much should we not go over?
It's very, if you want to collect for the boss, that's difficult, okay? Because we say you cannot give a gift of anything more than nominal value. And there is no, similar to a class gift to a teacher, there is no regulation dealing with group gifts to the boss. And so collecting group gifts that are over, the commission says anything above nominal value. What's nominal value? I don't know. If you ask our enforcement division, they would say if we get a complaint that alleges a gift over nominal value, it better be more than $40. If you ask our legal division, they say nominal value is handmade gifts, baked goods, nothing more than $10. Our legal division is conservative in the advice they give. Our enforcement division is conservative over the use of its resources and what it's willing to go after or not go after. So it depends, but those are good questions. We want to collect a gift for the boss. Can we? And then we'll tell you no, and then we can explain why we don't. Okay, that moves from the gift restriction rules to the nepotism rules, the financial interest conflicts. Very simple. You have to stay out of matters affecting certain financial interests. But whose? Well, yours, your immediate family members. If you have a business partner, as a town employee, you stay out of matters affecting the financial interests of a business partner. If you have business interests, you're either privately employed, you have a second job, or you own or operate a business that does business with the town. As a town employee, you've got to stay out of matters affecting the financial interest of a business that you affiliate with. And then finally, if you're negotiating for employment with any person or entity, and as a town employee, you also have dealings with them that might affect their financial interest. You can't participate as a town employee in matters affecting the financial interest of anyone or any organization with whom you are negotiating for prospective employment. There is a workaround, because if you have a financial interest affecting any of those categories, you've got to stay out of the matter. But what happens if the financial interest is so insignificant, nobody's going to become concerned about it? Well, there's a workaround in the law that allows the town to decide matters. You basically have to stay out of the matter, abstain or recuse, because your financial interests are affected. But you have an option. If for whatever reason you feel compelled to continue to want to handle the matter, but your financial interests are affected, you can file a disclosure, a written disclosure with the boss, similar to the travel expense regulation I talked about, similar process. You file a disclosure with the boss of your financial interest, and they then have to decide what to do about your conflict because you can't. You have to stay out of the matter. The boss receives your disclosure that you have to stay out of a matter because it affects whoever's financial interest. They can do one of three things: take responsibility for the matter and handle it themselves, assign the matter to someone else to handle. But the third thing they can do, if they're willing to determine that your financial interest is not so significant so as it would affect the integrity of the services that they can expect from you, that written determination waives the statute. Bottom line rule under the nepotism section: you got to stay out of matters that affect certain financial interests unless the boss, in writing, says it's okay. Now, at the town level, where would this be an appropriate remedy? Well, collective bargaining, personnel issues. What happens if say I'm the police chief in the town and I have a son or a daughter, an immediate family member who's a police officer, and we've got collective bargaining coming up. Now you've got management and you've got labor, the association, you've got town manager, you've got the department head. The department head is an integral part of the manager's team in collective bargaining. However, if I have a son or a daughter who's a police officer, that's a nepotism issue for me. I have to stay out of that matter. But this mechanism is in place. I can file a written disclosure with my appointing authority of the town manager, and if they're willing to make that determination that the integrity of the services that they can expect from me is not so significant so as it would affect the integrity of my services, that allows me to participate in collective bargaining. So there's all sorts of areas where the conflict law imposes impediments and the town needs to find a workaround. There may be a workaround in the law available to enable things to happen. If you are elected, this whole workaround presumes that you're an appointed town employee and you have an appointing authority. So this workaround is available to you. If you are elected and you do not have an appointing authority because you're elected, this option is not available to you. If an elected official encounters a financial interest conflict, they have to stay out of the matter. Immediate family is defined in the statute and it's reflected here on the chart. If a matter affects the financial interest of any of those people on the chart, it's a nepotism issue. You are a member of your own immediate family. If you have a spouse, your spouse is a member of your immediate family, and then it's your parents, your siblings, and your children. And then if it's your spouse, it's your spouse's parents, your spouse's siblings, your spouse's children. Those are your immediate family members. You have to stay out of matters as a town employee if any of the financial interest of any of those folks are affected. Now this then begs the question: what about matters affecting family who are not immediate family, non-immediate family members? First of all, who are they? Cousins, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, grandparents, grandchildren, ex-spouses, domestic partners. Not on the chart, not an immediate family member. Not an immediate family member, not a nepotism issue. But that doesn't mean the conflict law doesn't apply. If I'm poised to award a contract to my cousin's company, it's not a nepotism issue because a cousin is not an immediate family member. But is that going to create an appearance of a conflict? You betcha. And so if it were a contract to my brother's company, conflict law says stay out of it. Awarding a contract to my cousin's company, the law says you can continue to do your job, but you have an appearance of a conflict, you got to tell the boss in writing first. And then, friends, yes, it's the same for friends. Anywhere where you have a private connection. The financial interest conflict section deals with immediate family members. But anyone who is not, which would include non-immediate family and friends, then it's an appearance of a conflict of interest. Good question. Okay. For board members, you don't have the workaround if you encounter a financial interest conflict, but you do have something called the rule of necessity. And that just says if a board cannot act in a matter it's legally required to act on because it can't put a quorum together because a majority of the board members have nepotism issues, the board can invoke the rule of necessity, and that allows everybody to then participate in the matter. But there's a specific process. See the reference to an advisory. For a board to properly invoke the rule, they have to follow a process. Number one, they need legal advice, either from town council or from the commission's legal division. Written advice that says the invocation of the rule is appropriate in this circumstance. And then once they receive the legal advice, at a meeting where the issue occurs where they can't put a quorum together because of nepotism issues, at the meeting where the board would decide the matter, one of the affected members would invoke the rule, and then everybody has to disclose for the minutes what their particular nepotism issue is. And it has to be a last resort. In other words, if this board can't act because it can't put a quorum together because of financial interest conflicts, but they can pass their responsibility over here, then they have to do that. It only applies if the board is legally required to act and it cannot act because it can't put a quorum together because of financial interest conflicts, not because of appearances of conflict. We had a case involving a city council in a city close to Boston, had a very controversial development issue going out. 7 members of the city council, 4 of them had conflicts of interest. 2 of them had nepotism conflicts. 2 of them had appearance conflicts that could be cured by the filing of a disclosure. Instead, the chair, who had a nepotism conflict, didn't like the fact that he couldn't participate. So he declared that the rule of necessity applied because they had 4 members of the city council who had conflicts of interest. They invoked the rule, and then they all voted. And then we found out about it. And then we went after them and said, you 2 had to stay out of it, but the board could have still put a quorum together without your participation. You violated the conflict law. You 2 could have continued to participate had you just filed a disclosure. So the board improperly invoked the rule of necessity, so the board members did not get the protections that the rule affords. The rule of necessity waives the nepotism section, but it has to be followed appropriately or it does not provide legal protection. So we have an advisory about that. Board members, when you need to abstain, sometimes people get confused. They don't understand what their authority is as a board member. And they encounter a nepotism issue. And they think they have to abstain. And you see different things. You'll see a situation where a board member will say, I'm abstaining, and then they remain at the desk. Or I'm abstaining, and then they go sit in the audience. Or they abstain, and then they get up and leave the room. Which is correct? A, B, C, or D, all of the above? All of the above. The conflict law only says don't participate. That means you can't participate in the discussion, you can't participate in the vote, you can't glare at anyone, you can't share hand signals with anyone, you cannot do anything substantively to further whatever the issue is. If you are required to abstain, you abstain. But we see all these variations, and we get complaints from people sometimes. Hey, he abstained, but he sat up at the desk. Well, what's the problem? Well, what do you mean? Well, did they talk about the matter? No. Did they vote on the matter? No. Well, what was the... Well, their very presence was intimidating to their fellow board members. They wouldn't dare vote. That never happens. Or they glared, or they swapped hand signals, or something like that. If you're required to abstain, you just don't participate. But you want to think about what's in your best interest. Because even though you comply with the law, you may not be doing everything to insulate yourself from a complaint to the Ethics Commission. And believe me, we get them. And I will tell you, when we get a complaint that involves the nepotism section of the law, we're going to look into it. And we're going to look into it until we're satisfied that there was no violation. That means we're going to look at all the records available. We're going to talk to everybody who was there. We're going to talk to you. You're going to feel a little intimidated by that process. And it is an intimidating process. So you want to think about it. If I don't have any skin in the game, do I want to stay up on at the table even though I can? Maybe somebody's going to get the wrong idea and complain to the Ethics Commission. Now, if we're doing our job correctly, we'll get through that issue and we'll get to the correct result. You stayed at the table, but you didn't violate the conflict law. But in my experience as an investigator handling these matters, never in my experience did somebody ever say after we said, okay, we looked at this, I know it was intrusive, we're not going to look at it any further, we're confident that there was no violation of the law. Never was the response, thanks, let's do that one again real soon. Because arguably it's intrusive, but it's arguably necessary in the public interest. Point being, think about it. If you don't have any skin in the game, do you really want to insist on staying at the table where even though you're not violating the law, it's your reputation at stake, especially if you're serving unpaid on a board. You're not there to have your reputation impugned, but you got to think about it. A lot of the conflict law is the requirements, but it's also optics. What can people conclude about this circumstance? And then we see situations where people will abstain and go sit in the audience. So, example, I serve on an elected 5-member planning board, and Walmart has just filed an intent to build a big box store right next to my house. Do I have a nepotism issue? Yeah. The property values of the surrounding area are all going to be affected. But I don't lose any of my rights just because I serve on the planning board. I can't participate as a planning board member. When the public hearing comes up, I can be heard as a member of the public. I can represent my own interests. And so I can abstain and then go sit in the audience, and then when it's time for the public to give their views on the matter, I can do that, as long as I'm representing my own interest and not my neighbors or friends. And that's where people sometimes get hooked up. Then we see these situations where people abstain and they leave the room. Why would they do that if the law doesn't require it? Well, the court said in a decision, considering this kind of a case, the wisest course of action is to leave the room. Why would they say that? Because when you leave the room, you remove all doubt. Nobody can come back later and say you did something, you weren't even there. And so we'll have situations where people go over and above and they won't even attend the meeting. And if you have no skin in the game and you have to abstain and you can leave the room, then that insulates you because nobody can then say you participated. But if you want to abstain and stay at the table or abstain and go sit in the audience, that's within your purview as well. Okay, code of conduct section. What time? Oh my God, it doesn't go. Mr. Gasper is never going to stop. I will eventually. You're saying yes, I agree? Same thing. They have different meanings in a different context because some boards will, abstaining is just a way to record that you were present. So it's aye, nay, abstain. That reflects you were there and present, but you didn't vote yes or no. So people can get confused. In our world, abstain means you're not participating in the matter. Recuse means you're stepping back from any further participation. The two terms mean the same thing in our world. Okay, that's the nepotism section. Now the code of conduct section that I talked about, appearance of conflict of interest. The statutory language says that you as a town employee may not act in a manner such that a reasonable person, knowing all of the circumstances, could conclude that you would act with bias, that you could be improperly influenced, that you might decide a matter differently than you ordinarily would because the issue affects some component of your private life. And then the section further provides that if you file a disclosure of that bias in advance, legally the disclosure serves to dispel the appearance problem that's otherwise created. So it's no longer reasonable for the public to conclude that you could be biased because you put the cards on the table in advance. That insulates you from any potential violation. Also, improper use of public position. Public employees are prohibited from using their public positions to secure for themselves or others unwarranted privileges that are of substantial value. There's that $50 component again. The commission can't prosecute somebody for improper use of public position unless we can quantify that the value of the benefit that they received that they should not have was $50 or more. Improper use of public position. Let me give you an example. So I work in the town and I have one job. I issue a permit. I don't know what kind of permits you have. I live on the Cape, so we have beach stickers, transfer station stickers, all sorts of stuff. So my job with the town is to issue a permit, and everybody wants the permit, everybody needs the permit. To get the permit, they have to do two things. Fill out an application and pay a permit fee. To get it over $50, let's say the permit fee is $60. And then one day my Uncle Harry comes in and he wants a permit. And I tell him, Uncle Harry, today's your lucky day. Today you get the friends and family discount. Fill out the application, I'll give you the permit. You won't have to pay for it. In that instance, that would involve an improper use of my public position to secure an unwarranted privilege for someone I'm connected to privately, my Uncle Harry. Why is it an unwarranted privilege? Because in doing my job, I'm required to follow all of the rules. And you know what rule is not in place there? Friends and family discounts. Public employees, when we perform our duties, what we all know is we don't get to make up the rules as we go along. There's a whole process. There's a process for developing rules. But everything we do follows a rule or a statute or a bylaw or a regulation so that we treat similar matters similarly. Under the conflict of interest law, if a public employee deviates from the normal rules that guide how they're supposed to handle a matter, and as a result of that deviation, either the public employee or someone they're connected to benefits by $50 or more, it's an unwarranted privilege on its face and it violates the conflict of interest law. This principle applies to using public resources for non-public purposes, such as political activity. Can you solicit campaign donations from your colleagues during the day here in Town Hall? Heck no. Use of public resources for non-public purposes. Can you spend all day on your computer sending out campaign solicitation emails? How much does an email cost? How do we get to $50? Your time. We don't know what it costs to use technology. We know how much you make, and we can figure out how much time you spent, and you do the math. But any public use or any use of public resources for non-public purposes can implicate the conflict. We say any abusive use, and that means it's worth $50 or more. You know, if you're a town employee and you have a take-home vehicle, and you're using the town's gas and the vehicle to drive up to your ski chalet in Vermont every weekend, that could be an improper use of public position, use of public resources for non-public purposes. Any private or non-public use of public resources can violate the conflict law.
You drive up to that town back, to get you on call. You meet at the back town hall.
Right. That's where there's got to be a policy. It has to be talked about in advance. You don't get to decide on your own that this is okay. The boss has to say it's okay. And I had a case like that involving a police officer who was a canine officer. And he had a camp up in New Hampshire and had a take-home vehicle because he was a canine officer and was going up to the camp every weekend. So we got a complaint that it was use of public resources for non-public purposes, very substantial. The cost of gas and the use of the vehicle, the wear and tear and stuff. So we investigated, and what we learned is the way the canine is trained is constant. He only eats when he's training. So there's no opportunity to leave the dog at home when I go up to the camp. We're always training or the dog doesn't eat. And so it was properly vetted with the town, and he had permission from the chief to take the car wherever he needed to with the dog because of that training regimen that they did. So it was allowed. Why was it allowed? Because it was fully vetted by the town, and they made decisions that this was in the best interest of the town. Okay, disclosing confidential information is restricted under the law. Now, we work in government. We understand there are public records law. There's some stuff that we handle that we understand is a public record, but there's some stuff that may not be. Personnel information, if you're involved in procurement, bids, school department, pupil information, all sorts of stuff that, although we handle it as public employees, it may be confidential, protected under law. Under the conflict law, A public employee who learns confidential information in connection with their public employment is prohibited from disseminating that information to anyone who is not otherwise authorized to receive it. Now, inadvertent disclosures don't necessarily get our attention. What gets our attention? Any improper disclosure to further a personal purpose. That gets our antenna up. We had a case. It involved CORI information. Do we know what that is? Criminal offender record information. The case involved a clerk in one of our district courts. Now, clerks don't have access to CORI information in the courts, but there are people in the courts who do, the probation staff. This clerk had a relative who was running in a local election. One day, the clerk went up to one of the probation officers. She asked the probation officer to run a CORI check on her relative's opponent in that upcoming election. Did not provide any context to the probation officer so that they could evaluate whether it was a legitimate business request. It wasn't. In any event, the probation officer assumed it was, ran the CORI check, got a hit, an arrest record, which he then provided to the clerk, who then provided it to her relative, who then released it to the newspapers. And guess who won the election? And then we learned about it. Now, the commission has no authority to undo, influence, or do whatever with elections. That's the people's business. We enforce the conflict law, and the commission did. In its decision, the commission said, Madam Clerk, respectfully, even though you are not cleared to receive CORI information, once you did, you were obligated to keep that information confidential. Instead, you disseminated that information to somebody who was not authorized to receive it, and you did so to further a personal purpose. Get the checkbook out. This one's going to hurt. And the commission took enforcement action in that regard. Now, an important point to be made is this restriction survives your public employment. It doesn't matter whether you are a current or former town employee. If you learn confidential information as a town employee and you then leave town service, and then several years later you find some way to leverage that information and you do so, it is still actionable by the commission. As a law enforcement agency that can prosecute violations, the commission operates under what's called a statute of limitations. 6 years from the date of a violation within which the commission can take steps to enforce the statute. So even if you're a former town employee, if you're within that 6-year window and you improperly disseminate the information and it's to further a personal purpose, it is still actionable. For all of you that might be involved in campaign activity, we have an advisory on our website which explains how not to violate the conflict law. It has some useful examples of what's allowed, what's not allowed. So if this resonates at all, go to our website, find the advisory, read it. Then if you have any specific questions you need to know about, call and talk to one of the attorneys in our legal division. But it's advisory 11-1. What would be violations of the conflict law here? Improper use of public position, soliciting campaign support from people at work, conducting campaign activities within the public buildings, or any use of public resources for non-public purposes. We have an advisory on private commercial relationships. You oversee someone, say you work for building inspection and somebody who does fences, you're constantly approving permits for them to put up fences, and you need a fence. And you contact them and you want them to put up a fence. If I, as a town employee, have a private commercial relationship with the same people I deal with as a town employee, is that a conflict of interest? It's not a fatal conflict of interest. It's not prohibited. Public employees can engage in private commercial relationships with the same people that they deal with as public employees, as long as they don't engage in any sort of coercive behavior or leverage relationships. As long as I don't go to that fence person, your permits stand a better chance of being approved first time out if you can lower your price on the fence I want. Or, you know what, you said you were going to come in 2 weeks ago and I'm still waiting. I think I'm going to wait on acting on any more of your permits. Let's see how you like it. Coercive behavior. So at a minimum, any public employee who also has a private commercial relationship with the same people they deal with at work, that's going to be an appearance of a conflict. And if it is an appearance of a conflict, what does that mean? You got to tell the boss in writing. At a minimum, you got to tell the boss in writing. Improper use of public position can also be involved. Nepotism issues can also be involved, what have you. You got to be real careful. Okay, so we have this advisory that explains how not to violate the conflict law. Were there any questions? I'm sorry, I think I keep turning my head every time I see it.
Say on the building stuff or something, and I do the same thing myself. Doesn't it kind of infer that what you've got to deal, because I deal with it all the time, and you know that I do it, isn't it kind of, I mean, there was no other best happening around, but where I deal with that person all the time, should I not use it?
You're able to evaluate the services and the quality that people provide. You're allowed to do so. You can't use public resources. That's what these advisories basically stand for. If you engage in a private commercial relationship with the same people you deal with at work, you cannot use public resources in connection with that. I can't talk to that person at work, and I have to be certain that after work they have some publicly available contact information that I can contact, and then after work, without using public resources, I can then ask about doing the fence. If we come to an agreement, when I go to work, I have to tell the boss in writing that, hey, these people that I approve permits for all the time, they're also going to be working for me privately, stuff like that. And then you can't engage in coercive behavior, you know, if things go south, and sometimes they go south. Okay, I've talked about how the conflict law applies to you at work. Gift restriction rules, nepotism rules, code of conduct rules. There's also a couple of sections that apply to us when we're not at work. One of them we call the divided loyalty section. You'll be happy to know that the conflict of interest law imposes a duty of loyalty on you to the town. It imposes a duty of loyalty on me to the state. What that restriction means is that in my off-the-job capacity, when I'm handling my private stuff, if any of my stuff involves a state agency, I can't act on anyone's behalf in matters before state agencies. You cannot act on anyone's behalf before any town departments. You can always act on your own behalf. The conflict law is concerned about you using your position, your expertise, your influences to benefit third-party interests at the expense of the town. So what it says is, when you're off the job handling your own stuff, matters involving the town, you can be involved in them. But you cannot do so on somebody else's behalf, whether it's a business, an organization, or a person, because your duty of loyalty is the town. So the conflict law imposes two restrictions. You can't represent, whether you're paid or not, it's irrelevant. You can't represent third-party interests before the town or in town matters. You cannot be hired and paid to work on matters that involve the town. To do either to represent someone's interest or to work on matters and be paid for working on those matters would compromise the duty of loyalty to the town that the conflict law imposes on you. Now, for board members, this is where there's some flexibility in the law. Because say I sell insurance in my private capacity, and the town is one of my customers, and I deal with the town manager's office on policies that they have, liability policies or what have you. And then the town puts out the call. They need some volunteers. We've got these vacancies on our board. Would you consider serving on a board? And I think, hey, part of my civic engagement, okay, I'll agree. So I serve on the unpaid planning board. Well, guess what? If I'm serving on a town board, that makes me a town employee. Can I then represent my insurance business before the town? Oh, no. But that's where the law has this provision called special municipal employees. Certain positions can be designated by the town as special municipal employee positions. Any position that's unpaid, such as all the boards. Any position that is paid at less than 800 hours in a year. The town has a part-time animal control officer that works 2 days a week. Or any position by the nature of the service provided to the town, it allows for private employment during normal business hours. Vendors. In certain instances, a vendor becomes a town employee. If their services are required to satisfy the contract with the town, they become a town employee, subject to the conflict law restrictions. but their position is eligible to be designated as a special municipal employee position. For positions so designated, it creates flexibility. It says that although I sell insurance to the town and I serve on the planning board, which implicates the duty of loyalty requirement, being a special, it only applies to the planning board. I can't represent my insurance business before the planning board, but I can represent it before any other town departments. That's what being a special does. It creates flexibility under the law. Because if we didn't have that, who's going to volunteer for an unpaid board position if we then said you've got to sever all of your business ties to the town as a result? Nobody's going to volunteer. It's not workable. And so the special municipal employee designation is available to allow towns to staff the boards, even those that have business interests with the town. Okay, and so this is a further discussion on special municipal employees. Any town position that's unpaid, or if it is paid, it's at less than 800 hours in a year, or by the terms, classification, or conditions of employment, vendors, allows or permits personal or private employment during normal work hours. Okay. There are regulations that apply to the duty of loyalty requirement. What happens if you're a town employee and you have a child in the district and your child receives special education services? Can you represent your child before the school department in connection with that? Only if you're only under the regulation. The regulation says that town employees who are also parents can represent their children before the school department. And then there's a requirement that says if you occupy a supervisory position, we had a case involving school committee and the school superintendent where the school committee was the chair. Daughter was receiving special education services that he didn't like. So the school committee member bypassed the special education director and instead went straight to the superintendent and said, I think my daughter would be better served by the town providing tuition to this very expensive out-of-district private school. The special education director said, we can provide all the services needed in-house. But the school superintendent, who wanted his contract renewed and the raise to come up, instead undermined and bypassed the special education director and agreed to the out-of-district placement at a very high expense to the town. And then we learned about it. And so we lightened the wallets of both the school committee member and the superintendent. They both violated the conflict law in unique ways. So it also gave rise to this regulatory exemption that says you can be a parent with a school in the district and with a child in the school district, you can represent their interests. But if you occupy a supervisory position, like you're a school committee member and you're dealing with the special education director or the school superintendent, you have to separately disclose that so that there's transparency about that. Because that's subject to abuse and coercion. There's also an exemption permitting people serving on town boards. I don't know if there's anything here, but on the Cape they have marine advisory commissions, where the statute of the bylaw might say we want people in the fishing industry to be a part of the committee. We need one member. So you've got somebody who's a part of the industry being affected by the work of the commission, and the financial interests of their industry, including themselves, could be impacted by whatever policies they set. So by regulation, it says town boards can have members with specialized expertise or special connections to an industry and participate in general policy matters, even if their own financial interests are going to be affected. Okay, we're going to finish up real quick. There's also a section in the law that applies to whether you can take on a second paid town job or acquire a financial interest in a vendor contract. The conflict of interest law is concerned about what we call inside track situations. An inside track being an opportunity of a town employee to use their position or contacts or influences to secure additional opportunities for public compensation. So in response, the conflict of interest law has about the broadest language you can imagine. A town employee is prohibited from having a financial interest in a town contract. That's all it says. And that means that you're restricted as to whether you can be a town employee in position A and take on a second part-time position with town department B. Or you can be a town employee and also acquire a financial interest in a vendor contract, being awarded a contract by a town department or going to work for a vendor who's been awarded a contract by a town department. That is totally unworkable language, but that is the state of the law. So this section has numerous statutory and regulatory exemptions that apply. The point I want to make is, understand the conflict of interest law applies to whether you can take on a second paid town job or whether you can be a town employee and work on a vendor contract that involves the town. The conflict law is implicated. But don't assume the answer is no. But this is where if the opportunity comes up, don't assume the answer is no, but call our office and ask. The answer might be no, but in most cases, if there's no overlap between position A and position B, or your town position and the vendor contract, there's going to be a workable way that you can do both. But there's a continuum of compliance. You might have to have a position that's designated as a special. This is where the conflict law provides flexibility if you are in a position that's been designated as a special municipal employee, or if you occupy a town position and you want to take on a second paid position that has been designated as a special, you can do that. All you have to do is file a written disclosure with the town clerk's office that you're holding those two positions. And if there's any connectivity between position 1 and position 2, or the town position and the vendor contract, it's still doable. But you might need to be a special, you might need to have the Board of Selectmen waive the requirements, you might need a department head to certify that they don't have anybody in-house to do the work that they want you to do, stuff like that. So just understand, on its initial face, the conflict law says no. You know, when we get the calls into our legal division about whether somebody can take on a second job or acquire an interest in a vendor contract, the answer is always no, unless you qualify under an exemption. Whether you qualify under an exemption depends on a detailed analysis of all of the facts. And as I said, don't assume the answer is no. It may be, but don't assume that because there are workarounds. Okay. The restriction doesn't apply to an unpaid position. Why? Because in an unpaid position, you don't have a contract with the town, a financial interest in a contract. But understand, if you occupy a town position that's paid, and then you're appointed to an unpaid position, there's no implication of the conflict law from the paid position to the unpaid position. There's no financial interest in a contract there. But guess what? Once you occupy the unpaid position, you become a town employee as well. And you're a town employee who has a financial interest in that other town contract. It gets kind of crazy, but we look at it from both sides of the street. That's easily curable with a simple disclosure. I work for a town department and I'm paid. I get appointed to an unpaid position. All I need to do is tell my appointing authority for the paid position, I also have this unpaid position. That's all that's needed. And so that's where our legal division is available. It's a quick phone call. You may need to file a disclosure. Figuring out the right disclosure. What I didn't tell you is that we have disclosure forms on our website. But there are 29 different sections of the conflict law. There are numerous regulatory exemptions for which a disclosure is required. Those forms are all on our website. If you get into a situation and you think you might need to file a disclosure, so you go to our website and you peruse, your eyes will glaze over before you find the right form. There's a lot of subtlety to them. If you think you're in a situation where you need to file a disclosure, guess what you need to do? Call the commission. Talk to an attorney in our legal division. They can confirm whether your situation implicates the law. And then if so, would a disclosure be the appropriate remedy? And then if so, this is the right disclosure form. And this is where you file it. And then they'll answer any questions you have about what information has to be disclosed on that form. Okay, restrictions on appointment. Board members are ineligible for appointment to positions supervised by their board until they've been off the board for 30 days. So I serve on the Board of Health. We employ a health director. Health director resigns or is terminated and I want to occupy that position. Can I be appointed to that position while I'm on the Board of Health? No. Can I be appointed to the position at all? Yes. Once I've been off the board for 30 days, I am eligible to be reappointed. I can apply for the position at any time. but I cannot be appointed to the position until I've been off the board for 30 days. This only applies to positions hired and supervised by the board. If I am on the Board of Health and the health director resigns, but the health director is appointed by the town manager, then there's no issue. But if I'm on the Board of Health and I get appointed as the health director, is that a workable situation? No. But it's not necessarily prohibited under that scenario. Can I be a school teacher and serve on the school committee? No. There's the conflict law and Department of Education regulations specifically restrict teachers from also serving on the school committee. I can be a teacher and run for school committee, and I can win the seat, but then I have to decide what I'm going to do. I can't do both positions. And I say that because there's an exemption under the conflict law that says a town employee can also serve on the Board of Selectmen. I could be a full-time firefighter in the town, and I can run for the board, and if I win, I can serve in both positions without violating the conflict law. But the conflict law imposes restrictions on what I can do then. If I'm a firefighter and I'm also on the Board of Selectmen, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I have to stay out of matters within the purview of the fire department. Also, to deal with the inside track situation, I can only be paid from one source. So do I want to continue to receive my firefighter salary and overtime, or would I rather take that measly stipend they pay the board members? But I have to make that choice. I can only be paid from one source. The third condition is I'm ineligible for appointment to any other town position while I'm on the board and for 6 months after I leave the board. And that means that if I'm a firefighter serving on the Board of Selectmen and a promotional opportunity comes up in the fire department, I couldn't take it. Doesn't matter whether it's civil service. Doesn't matter whether I'm on the top of the list. Doesn't matter how badly they want to appoint me to it. While I'm serving on the board and until I've been off the board for 6 months, I cannot take any other town position. Okay, last section. We are going to be done momentarily. I see the sighs of relief on many of your faces. I will thank you all because by this part, I'm looking at a lot of droopy eyes, and I don't see any here. So I thank you for your kind attention. The final topic we're going to talk about deals with when you leave town government, revolving door restrictions. The context being a town employee who leaves their town position today. Tomorrow they go through the revolving door, and now as a former town employee, they're representing a third-party interest before that department they just left. We understand that best in Washington, these influential Washington folks who leave and then they become lobbyists, or they start representing, white shoe clients, they're getting all the big money now. The same principle applies under the conflict of interest law. There are two basic restrictions under what we call revolving door restrictions. The context being, you leave the town today, you go through the revolving door tomorrow, you're now representing some third-party interest before that department you worked for. There's the forever ban that says if you worked on something as a town employee, you may never go through that revolving door and represent a private party in connection with those matters. Permanent restriction. Doesn't matter how long ago it was. If I'm the fire chief, and one of the last things I did was we took delivery of a new fire truck. This company built it for us, contracted all that stuff. Then I leave and I go to work for them. And then the fire truck that they built breaks down and we're looking at liability. I cannot represent my new employer regarding that matter because as a town employee, I was involved in that matter. That's the forever ban. The 1-year cooling off period applies to matters that while you may not have worked on them, they were nonetheless under your official responsibility. If you're a department head, everything that comes into your department is a matter under your official responsibility as the department head. But you don't necessarily handle everything that comes in. That's why you have staff. You can distinguish between matters that you handled, matters that you didn't handle. But all those matters that you didn't handle, they were still under your official responsibility as the department head. The forever ban applies to those matters that you did handle. A 1-year cooling off period applies to those matters that you didn't handle but they were nonetheless under your official responsibility. At any point in the last 2 years of your town employment, if it was under your official responsibility but you didn't otherwise handle it, you leave town service, you want to go through that revolving door, you have to wait 1 year before you can represent those interests. If neither condition applies, it's open season. You can leave your town position today, go through that revolving door tomorrow and represent some third-party interest as long as the reason for your representing them is not in connection with matters that you handled or matters that were under your official responsibility. The final slide is the most important. When in doubt, panic. Don't panic. Know when the conflict law is implicated. Public responsibilities, private interest, when there's an intersect. We talked about the gift restriction rules, the nepotism rules, code of conduct rules, restrictions on acquiring a financial interest in another contract, the duty of loyalty requirements, and finally, the revolving door restrictions. When an issue comes up, don't do anything until you understand whether and how the law applies, and that's why we are here. Don't be afraid to contact the Ethics Commission. Again, in most cases, it's a 5 or 10-minute phone call. I thank you all for your kind attention. If you didn't sign up, make sure you do, and we have copies of the slide deck. Other than that, if there are any questions, other than that, thank you for your kind attention, and take care.